Hi everyone, this is Inside the Americas. Coming up, Joe Biden's pick for defense secretary would be the first ever black American to head up the Pentagon. There is controversy, though, surrounding the choice of recently retired Army General Lloyd Austin. The details coming up. Then, 8 years after a Mexican journalist was killed, a group of international reporters have picked up her unfinished investigation into links between drug cartels and local officials. And the man who inspired the right stuff has died. 97-year-old Chuck Yeager was the first ever test pilot to break the sound barrier. I'm Jeannie Godula. First, the deadline for U.S. states to settle any disputes over votes has passed, and President Donald Trump's slim hopes of overturning the election result are starting to vanish completely. Since the election, November 3rd, the president's team has filed dozens of lawsuits challenging the outcome in states like Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. And while the vast majority of those have failed, the Republican Party is still mostly sticking with Trump. Peter O'Brien explains.
Well, I just spoke to him. He's doing very well.
Despite the best efforts of Donald Trump's lawyers, all the states they raised disputes with have met a deadline to certify their election results, paving the way for Joe Biden's win to be confirmed when the Electoral College meets on the 14th of December. A day before the deadline, Georgia reaffirmed its results after a second recount requested by the Trump campaign.
We have now counted legally cast ballots 3 times. And the results remain unchanged. I know there are people that are convinced the election was fraught with problems, but the evidence, the actual evidence, the facts tell us a different story.
Claiming widespread fraud, the Trump campaign has filed dozens of lawsuits. In Pennsylvania, they tried and failed to block the certification of results entirely.
If you look at Nevada, which is moving along very rapidly, or Arizona, you saw those numbers come out yesterday. We found massive fraud, and in other states also. This is probably the most fraudulent election that anyone's ever seen.
While one by one, nearly all of these challenges have been dismissed or withdrawn for lack of evidence, Trump's team has stuck by him. No one more so than his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, no matter how many gaffes in public and failures in court. From a press conference held in a car park at the wrong address, to hair product streaming down his face, asking a witness to take her mask off.
But would you be comfortable taking your mask off so that people could hear you more clearly?
Can you hear me now?
And another witness claiming she'd personally seen tens of thousands of votes go awry.
At least 30,000.
At least 30,000. Okay.
Attorney Sidney Powell, meanwhile, even after being dropped from Trump's legal team, has continued to unsuccessfully press claims of fraud. And it's not just those who've been in Trump's inner circle that remain on board. The majority of Republican lawmakers may not acknowledge Biden's win until January, when Congress is set to confirm it.
We love Trump!
Going against Trump's grievances would risk backlash from his supporters in their constituencies, while going with them could build popular support. After losing to Biden, the Trump campaign requested donations for what it called an election defense fund. It's already raised more than $170 million.
That comes as U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has unveiled more of his new cabinet picks. The man tipped to be his defense secretary, retired Army General Lloyd Austin. If confirmed, Austin would become the first black leader of the Pentagon. But there could be a sticking point. The Constitution says the defense secretary needs to be a civilian or out of the military for at least 7 years. And that is not Austin's case. The details with Catherine Viette.
A potentially history-making pick as President-elect Joe Biden gets set to tap General Lloyd Austin to be his defense secretary. If confirmed by the Senate, Austin would become the first African-American to head up the Pentagon. But he could face opposition from some members of Congress who would prefer to see civilian leadership over the military. Austin retired as a 4-star general from the Army in 2016 after serving for 41 years. He rose through the ranks, becoming the leader of U.S. Central Command, where he was responsible for overseeing military strategy in the Middle East. While he is well respected and known as a strong battlefield commander, his confirmation needs a congressional waiver, since the law currently requires a minimum of 7 years between active duty and leading the Pentagon. Austin has been retired for just 4 years. This will be only the third time a president has requested a waiver since the National Security Act was passed in 1947. The first president to do so was Harry Truman, who appointed George Marshall in 1950. More recently, President Donald Trump requested one to appoint retired Marine Corps General James Mattis. In passing the law, Congress believed only special circumstances should dictate having a recently retired military officer lead the Defense Department. It's unclear if enough lawmakers are willing to support granting the necessary waiver. After Mattis's appointment in 2016, some members of Congress said it was a mistake and have indicated they won't support another exception.
Our number of the week is this one, 100 million. That's the number of COVID-19 vaccinations Joe Biden says will be rolled out in the first 100 days of his presidency. Coronavirus cases are soaring in the United States, now more than 15 million, with 280,000 American deaths so far. Next, Regina Martinez was a Mexican journalist investigating links between drug cartels and local authorities. She was killed 8 years ago, but an international collective of investigative journalists has now picked up the story she was working on before she died. Catherine Kadir-Clifford explains.
Who wanted to silence this journalist, nicknamed La Chaparrita, or the Little One? What did she discover during her decade-long investigation into the governors of Veracruz state and their links with drug traffickers? She was repeatedly threatened for her reporting until her death in April 2012, when she was badly beaten and strangled in her home. Regina Martinez worked for a major weekly newspaper. Her colleague decided to investigate her murder, but didn't get far.
I received death threats. The effects were devastating and we had to stop the investigation.
A collective of 60 international journalists have now picked up where Regina's colleagues left off. During a 10-month investigation, they're reconstructing the report which she didn't have time to publish. Before her death, she was tracing thousands of people who disappeared overnight, such as taxi drivers, escort girls, or businessmen. People who had witnessed things the drug cartels didn't want to be seen. Regina had discovered that these Mexicans had been abducted and buried here in mass graves, and that authorities had been complicit.
These places were hidden, not just by the criminals, but also by the authorities. And I'm talking about local police, state police. If Regina had published this information, it would have been a bombshell for Veracruz's government.
Only the recordings of Regina's last interviews and her computer were taken on the night of her death. Local authorities recorded it as a regular burglary that went wrong. They've presented a suspect who claims his innocence. A federal prosecutor was appointed to the case, but his investigation was soon hampered.
Local authorities may have always hidden information from us, covered their tracks. We may never know who killed Regina, but I know who didn't kill her.
Questioned on the journalist's murder, the president promised to do everything possible to reopen the investigation. Since Regina Martinez's death, 52 journalists have been killed in Mexico because of their work.
This week, America lost one of its most famous pilots. Chuck Yeager died, aged 97 years old. Yeager was a pioneer aviator, a decorated U.S. military test pilot, and the very first person ever to break the sound barrier. Yuka Roye takes a look back at his life.
Captain Charles Yeager climbs down into the cockpit of the rocket craft.
He had the right stuff. Chuck Yeager was just 24 when, on board an X-1 rocket plane, he became the first human to break the sound barrier. For the aviator, no risk was, quote, too great to prevent the necessary job from getting done. 6 years later, he flew a newer version of the plane to reach more than twice the speed of sound. Born in 1923 to farming parents in West Virginia, Yeager joined the military after high school. He started off as a mechanic and went on to become a pilot, flying on 64 missions during World War II. After the war, he became an Air Force test pilot and continued flying for over 6 decades, logging 18,000 hours in more than 340 types of aircraft under his belt. In 2012, he flew in the back of an F-15 to commemorate his first supersonic flight, hitting Mach 1.3 this time.
To me, it's a stupid instrument. It tells you what your angle of attack is. If you don't know, you shouldn't be flying.
Lacking a college degree, Yeager could not become an astronaut, but his exploits contributed to the American space program, as told in Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff. In a statement, NASA's current administrator, Jim Bridenstine, said, "His path blazed a trail for anyone who wanted to push the limits of human potential, and his achievements will guide us for generations to come."
And finally, this week marked the 40th anniversary of the death of John Lennon. The former Beatle was shot and killed by Mark David Chapman in New York just a few hours after Lennon gave him an autograph. His former bandmates paid tribute on the day, Paul McCartney tweeting, "Remembering my friend John with the great joy he brought to the world." The other surviving Beatle, Ringo Starr, asking radio stations around the world to play Strawberry Fields Forever. Lennon's wife, Yoko Ono, called for peace and gun reform. Her poignant tweet showed a photo of Lennon's blood-splattered eyeglasses, reminding people of the 1.4 million Americans killed by guns since John Lennon died on December 8th, 1980. Well, that's all the time we have for this Inside the Americas. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next time for all the news from north to south.
Reporters. Exclusive insights. The stories that matter. Real people all around the world. France 24's international correspondents witness the news as it happens, where it happens, and they bring it to you.
Join me every week for a new edition of Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.